Hello, and welcome to the January 17th edition of kubeadm Office Hours. Today we're going to start by following up with a question that was raised yesterday in the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting about self-hosting etcd. Tim, do you want to rephrase or restate that question for this recording?
So the question that Jamie had and other people want to know is, what is CoreOS's current stance with regards to the etcd operator going forwards, and whether or not we should abandon some of those integration efforts on our front in favor of doing just a more customized configuration?
Yeah, so I can take that. So we commented a bit about this at KubeCon. I guess those kind of conversations tend to get lost, but basically what we've hit recently, trying to sort of develop some of the self-hosted options for etcd, is that we found that when you do that, the actual result is quite fragile. That we've had issues with API servers not reconnecting to etcd. These are sometimes like gRPC issues or other issues with the nebulous of static pods where they don't have quite well-defined there's sometimes undefined behavior when they like reconnect to the API server and that kind of thing. So what we have seen through there is that we have all these issues. We've had real customers have sort of bizarre crashes when doing self-hosted etcd. So we personally are probably not going to be exploring self-hosted etcd through the etcd operator anytime soon. I like to think that it's not just because our specific tool is not cut out for this task, though that could be perfectly true. But I think that there are some fundamental sort of loops that happen when you self-host etcd that expose some, that basically multiply bugs in the API server or in static pods or that kind of thing. And when we've set this up, I think that we have some things that we want to go explore upstream to go fix, particularly around API servers connecting to etcd and ensuring that the API server will reconnect. But while we were doing that, we sort of put a lot of our self-hosted etcd efforts on hold. So I don't know what that implies for kubeadm, but sort of our stance at this point is that we probably won't be exploring just the concept of self-hosted etcd in the near term, regardless of if it's through the operator or not.
That's fine. We just wanted to get your take, because I don't think it's worthwhile for Jamie to continue to rebase and pursue his efforts then on the existing patch, and that was his main question. And I concur, because we had multiple approaches we were willing to take, and we were pursuing all of them. And now it just eliminates one of those approaches, which actually makes our life a little simpler. So I think we should probably just continue to execute and go forward on the other approach, which is simpler in some respects, but then it puts some of the maintenance burden on kubeadm. And I think we're going to have to, we should try to parcel out and structure the code in such a way that I know we have everything defined as phases, but the etcd code itself for managing in this environment of how they want to manage it should probably be parceled off into its own section.
Yeah, I was going to have a sort of follow-up question for Eric or Ryan. If we're not recommending self-hosting etcd, what are sort of the recommended etcd deployments? Do we think that static pods is a good way to go still? Do we think that having an external etcd cluster is sort of the best sort of gold standard? Like what do we recommend for customers
Right.
in an ideal case? And then what are the other options that we think are also good?
So I can say that CoreOS definitely recommends dedicated etcd hosts not running through static pods. I don't know if the shuffling was sort of the issue where the interaction with the checkpointing was some of the concerns. I don't have the exact notes on hand about the bugs that we hit, but I can follow up with them and send them to the list.
Okay, you said dedicated hosts, but not running in static pods. So basically running completely outside of Kubernetes. You guys probably just used systemd and the CoreOS sort of built-in etcd to do that, I would guess.
we still run it through a container to get newer versions of etcd, I believe. But those are separate hosts from the cluster itself.
Excellent. Thanks.
What's the motivation behind not running static pods, even because there's versus just a container?
I actually don't know if there's specific motivations for why we don't do it. I think that generally our masters are in auto-scaling groups where our etcd instances are not. We don't do dynamic scaling of etcd that way. So for our architecture, it's often simpler just to have the masters be different than the etcds. I don't know if it's impossible to. I don't think that any of the bugs that we hit would indicate it would be problematic to run etcd in a static pod, but I probably get someone from the etcd team in.
Yeah, the separation of nodes is orthogonal to how the pods are started, or how the containers are started. So
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so the part of my logic behind separating out the control functionality behind etcd standup is that if you had a subcommand for etcd inside of kubeadm, you could just stand up an etcd cluster separate. And that would just basically be almost like an Ansible-ized version of standing up a cluster, which there's many recipes for. I know at Red Hat, there's a separate playbook inside of the OpenShift stuff, which just does that. And that's what we worked on like 2.5 years ago. But having something akin to that would be useful if a person's just like, I just want to stand up an etcd cluster and I want to manage the upgrade for that as a subcommand. All right, well, this is useful information. We can revisit, and we'll mention it to Jamie as well. I don't think there are any other agenda items. I know we typically talk about self-hosted, high availability, and upgrades. There's still a blocker for self-hosted. There aren't any takers, which is a little sad. I was hoping that we treaded the path, which was hard to do, but we need people to see through the last bit.
Can you mention what that is, Tim, or put a link in the notes to the
It's determining what we want to do with secrets for the API server. We determined that only the API server is the special case of standing back up during the 2 failure conditions. And we basically need to either figure out if we're going to do host-mounted settings there, or if we're going to try to do completely self-hosted with secrets. And then we'd have to check with the secrets.
Yeah, Tim, I've left some messages for you on Slack and VM. So I don't think I'm just looking now. You didn't reply yet, so maybe you can carry on discussion. I'm just trying to understand it before I can claim whether it's something else.
Why don't you go through the questions here, though? I mean, because that's.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I mean, like, I guess I was just wondering whether we really have to do this at secret level, or maybe we could, have some kind of secret to volume sync and use volumes, and then volumes backend could be in, let's say, I don't know, some kind of encrypted volume backend, or whatever the user would choose that.
Well, the simplest solution is to use host volume mounts, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking of just using the volume abstraction, and have a way of syncing secrets into volumes, right?
So if you wanted to do an upgrade, you wanted to do cert rotation, you would just basically have like a daemon set that would go to the masters and do the cert rotation for you and restart?
Maybe. No, you would rotate the cert by updating the secret, but the secret would be copied into a persistent volume of some sort. Perhaps in some cases that will be an encrypted persistent volume, depending what sort of volume providers user has. That's the kind of thing that crossed my mind.
So, given the sort of life cycle of volumes, I'm not sure how that volume would get mounted, though. Because the kubelet used to be responsible for attaching and mounting volumes, but that functionality got moved into the controller manager to centralize it and make it more reliable. So if the API server is not up, the controller manager is not able to talk to it to know that it should be mounting volumes.
Yeah, the problem is bootstrapping the API server. The kubelet needs to talk to the API server to mount the volumes. So you need to literally strip down the pod spec to almost nil for the API server, because there's some auto mounting magic that happens for like service account tokens and other goo. So when you have a self-hosted API server, it needs to be the bare minimum. And you'd have to put a special thing in there with regards to secrets that would be like, we're going to use the local checkpoint to mount versus trying to connect back to the API server.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, actually, I was thinking of that with the assumption that kubelet mounts the volumes, but now we're saying it no longer does that. So, okay. Interesting. And then
we could check with the storage SIG and see if they have any other ideas about volumes, but I'm pretty sure that switched to like back in 1.4 or so.
Yeah, okay. I came across that conundrum when I was actually just doing pod checkpointing, because there was a bunch of extra volume mounts that were added by default by the API server. And you need to explicitly turn all that stuff off in order for you to actually bring the pod back up. Otherwise, it'll try to immediately contact the API server when you are the API server. So,
interesting. Okay, right. Because I was just thinking that if kubelet finds a local volume, it just mounts it before it needs to before it talks to the API server. And I thought, well, it could just find the stuff there. But then we're going to skip that. That's all right. But I was also wondering about so if we think of this as a general use case, like secret checkpointing as a general use case, then wouldn't we like to consider config map checkpointing as well?
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. You get down into the rabbit hole, which is kind of like, I kind of prefer what other people had mentioned earlier, is the idea of just using host volume mounts. And if you want to do cert rotation, you have a daemon set pod, and the daemon set pod is privileged and can do that for you. And it can, if we had other strategies to bring things online, that would be nice, because then you could, you could roll the certs one by one and then update it.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. But in that case, wouldn't we use a similar kind of daemon set for upgrading static pods?
Yes, you could.
Yeah, so maybe because I was thinking of that, because that's like, in the self-hosting realm, you completely forget that this is potentially an option. And I was thinking of that previously, that, well, perhaps if we just had some kind of upgrade for daemon set, then we could pipe that through to the API. And perhaps there is like a CRD that takes this like a deployment like that thing, but not a deployment.
There's nothing that prevents us from doing the sort of privileged daemon set for upgrades mentality versus the self-hosted. I think the perception was we wanted to use the facilities that Kubernetes provides for doing the actual rollout of the modified control plane.
Yeah,
now, I absolutely think we can self-host the controller manager and the scheduler today, probably, if you wanted to, but the API server is the hard one.
And then, it's like, in that scenario, it's like you still have to take care of upgrading the kubelet separately, because we're not self-hosting kubelet. So exactly. Perhaps such daemon set could grow up into a kubelet upgrade one day too.
You could basically have kubeadm, be its own little container that could be install or upgrade, which then could run around. And if it's the upgrade one, it's running on the machines doing the pulling of the. I like the simplicity of it.
And we have something that, in a way, has some similarity to this idea. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Cured. It's like it's a daemon set that manages reboots. So we would run Ansible to upgrade kernels on Ubuntu, and then apt will write a file, reboot required. I forgot what's the password, but there's such a file that Ubuntu writes for you when they upgrade the kernel, and Cured takes care of rebooting and draining, and it has like I forgot, I think it has like some way you can control it to prevent rebooting if you have to. So that seems somewhat similar.
I'm not opposed to that, but I think what we need to do is have someone investigate the state space of what was there, and investigate the potential possibilities, these all being a couple of them, and kind of drive this home with the upgrade path. So we kind of have resolution, whether or not we're going to promote self-hosting to be a first-class thing, or we only self-host certain bits of it and then do the upgrade with the control plane. But I think the loose ends here are, we need to finish this off. So when we go to GA, we have a defined control plane and upgrade strategy deployment that is fully vetted and utilized, and
Okay.
Out of curiosity, what were the concerns with self-hosting the API server beyond the secrets? Or is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Well, you'd have to checkpoint the secrets, and you have to mash the code on the kubelet to make sure that it doesn't try to contact the API server as part of its secret detection, right? Because there's code in the kubelet that says like, oh, I see you have this construct. I need to go check the API server to make sure and verify that it's there.
I think we get around this in Buku by having a different initial API server than the self-hosted one, which is cheating.
The constraint here was that there's a lot of, it's a common use case to have a single master configuration. We want ease of upgrades for those folks. So it's like, that is actually the most common user story for kubeadm, and then provide out strategies that are clean for, HA configurations. For HA, this isn't a problem, right, at all, really.
Yeah, if you upgrade node at a time, right? Or
yes.
If you upgrade API server at a time.
If you had like a pivot, right? Like you could, if you had kubeadm have a single node, if we had stories and gradations, you could probably solve this too in a relatively clean way. Like I have a single API server, use daemon sets to upgrade those configurations. Or if I go to HA, then it's actually self-hosted, I don't care. Because I should be able to use the self-hosted configuration and all as well.
Okay, well, here's a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Here's a crazy idea. What if we just ran HA all the time on, one master node, one dedicated master machine, but it has 3 API servers, 3 etcds.
You're running out of ports?
No, I mean, well, I was thinking to I guess I'm just going back to what I was doing in Kubernetes anywhere initially, where I was using VNet to start with, and I was running control plane and etcd on the overlay.
It becomes weird. I like the idea of ages and stages, and making as long as the upgrade path is relatively unified for the different deployment configurations. That's my personal opinion. I know everyone wants to have like a pristine world where we always use Kubernetes to upgrade Kubernetes, but in that world, I think it's been proven that it's fraught with peril. And there's a version of this which is halfway in between that has well-defined configurations for A and B that I think is probably the happy path, and we should just go forwards with it at this point. But we need somebody to actually take this and to drive the solutions forward in this. I'm not going to have bandwidth. I'll have bandwidth to review and to go through some of the details, but I'm not going to have bandwidth to drive this right now. I just don't have the time. I think it's important that we have this upgrade / configuration solved for GA. So I do think it's a GA blocker.
Yeah, more so than HA, right? We kind of decided that HA, easy HA in blocker. So yeah, this seems much more important, of course. It's sort of, yeah, just logically. Okay, well, I'm quite keen on it. Yeah, and just to be clear, we're saying that we're quite open to what it would end up looking like at the end, right? So if there's something that turns out to be easier to do than the kind of self-hosting that we envision, like the daemon set idea that we discussed, perhaps that could be the option.
I like the daemon set idea as a default upgrades possibility. This makes things a lot easier for having a well-defined upgrade path, because we have like a couple staged approach currently. And I think if we were to wrap the kubeadm artifact in its container, as well as conditionalize the upgrades inside of the code, this would alleviate the major concern. Because the idea of self-hosting is that it makes upgrades easier. But if we can just make upgrades easier without having to do it, then win-win.
Okay.
What was the status of the kubelet checkpointing secrets? Because that solves a lot of the problems as well, right?
It checkpoints pods. We did not add checkpointing secrets because it was a ginormous Festivus trying to get just the first part in. And I didn't want to go to bat with an aluminum pole when Don has a bigger one.
Yeah.
I'm glad this is recorded. Yeah.
So I want to make certain that we vetted the conditions as much as we can, and we have folks on the security side have buy-in and everything else too. So when we do, if and when we do add secrets, it will be a fait accompli.
So yeah, and as sort of as it was mentioned in the previous call, that one of the downsides of that is it seemed like a general enough problem, right? But yeah, I do completely understand that right now it seems like abandoning that path would be kind of silly. So having a go at checkpointing secrets and sort of understanding the depths of the problem would be the right place to start. And then, keeping other options on. Yeah, keeping other options open seems like a good idea too. Yeah. Okay.
So are you signing up for it?
Yeah, I'd like to sign up to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So we said don't know what items on the agenda.
I don't have any other things on the agenda. I know that I need to, I know Lee, we reviewed your cert change. There's minor comments there.
Yeah.
then-
I responded to some things. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Tim. Did you have something to add?
Sorry, I think I was typing. Sorry, I'll mute.
Yeah, I am going to look at separating certificates dir for etcd out into a nested directory of etc Kubernetes PKI. I'm a little, I just don't know what I'm going to find when I go in there because everything else is in a flat directory right now. So we will see if that refactors nicely, but hopefully it doesn't require a code change. And then Tim, you wanted to name the etcd server cert, I guess. Is that what you're referring to? And then peer member?
Standardizing the nomenclature so it matches directly to the doc.
Okay.
Because there were a couple of names that were slightly different. So if it matches the doc, then it's kind of uniform for when people do searches.
I was gonna make the client certificate specific to the API server, so maybe I'll name that client-API server cert. Does that sound good to you? Since it's specific for the API server.
It sounds good right now. I'd have to take a look and see what
Okay.
examples are different.
So I'll name the certs as following the doc as server, client, and member instead of peer. But and then yeah, I'll do the refactor for some of the typos and the function names. But, thank you guys for looking at that and giving a detailed review. I'll get it up.
I know that I think it was Federico put up his PR for HA. I have it open, but I haven't had a chance to review. So I will enqueue that for today, and then that's along with the backlog cleaning for kubeadm itself. Okay. I don't have any other agenda topics unless other folks do.
I don't have any either. All right. I think we'll end a few minutes early today, which sounds good to me. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you guys again soon.